Marino. Sorry. Welcome everyone to this session of MYFest. I'm told this is the second session of 2026 summer, and it's my third year, I think, returning. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. MYFest is one of my favorite not just educational opportunities, I think, in the world, but it's also just an extraordinary community that Maha and Mia and Yasser and May and everyone have fostered and have created and continue to create with each session. And I only encourage you, if you enjoy this session, um, then you should come to more of them and tell your friends because people can sign up at any point in time. And if you don't enjoy the session, you should come to more sessions and tell your friends because the other people will be running those. Um, I've got some slides and some activities, and all of these things are brand new. So we'll see if they're any good. And a lot of them are thanks to other people that are not me. So let me share a portion of my screen. See if I can pull this off in a way that makes sense. We're going to go to the top. Okay, so our session is an AI resistance training. And you've got my credentials on the board. I teach writing at the University of Southern California, and sometimes elsewhere, including MyFest. Um, on the screen is a ridiculous, somewhat AI generated image of me in my disorganized office, pulling with all my might, wearing my signature fedora, pulling against a robot who's wearing a shirt that says RoboFit, and I'm pulling using resistance bands. Um, and then just, prior to just some other context, I guess, for me, I have uh, a self-published autobiography of Chat GPT called Hallucinate This that I'm happy to share with anybody in this session for free, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but you can also pick up on Amazon. And we have Rob Wittig on the call, who's to thank for the autobiography, and I think authorized as well, were both his words, and also the structure and a lot of the content of that work. So this is the the autobiography is a memoir of ChatGPT that takes the form of a series of prompts um, that sort of lead ChatGPT to hallucinate an existence as though it were a person. And a lot of my work deals with trying to help people not think of bots as people, which is extremely hard to do. And it's been hard to do ever since the first bot, the ELIZA system that ran the persona doctor back in 1966. A lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of, created by Joseph Weizenbaum. And um, together with seven other authors, we've got a book coming out this summer in July called Inventing Eliza. And that covers also up how the first chatbot shaped the future of AI. And again, Joseph Weizenbaum, who was a Holocaust survivor, um, even though he was also a little bit of a trickster when he created the doctor program on Eliza, or the doctor script, he really was testing the degree to which people would sort of have a real conversations with bots. Uh, and even though he worked very hard, I think maybe to perfect that illusion, his essay about the project begins to explain something is to explain away that thing. And so he felt that even from the start, he was being very open about this not being a person in the least, except I think he was a little bit ambivalent himself because the everything he published in that article, including a dialogue with a young woman who may or may not have been one person, um, they're very powerful examples, and so powerful that many people thought that computers could now give out psychological advice or talk to you. And he also circulated some of the stories. But then when he saw what happened, he unlike today's Silicon Valley Bros X, or whatever we want to call them, he responded with horror and turned against the whole artificial intelligentsia, in ways, rather than, cash his paycheck from DARPA or wherever he would have, found very profitable future. Also, I'm a part of this group called the Transformers. So we've got this AI generated T-shirt of the Transformers. Looks like little notebooks and typewriters turned into robots. And it says writing instructors in the age of AI. And this group has Anna Mills, John Ippolito Maha, Jeremy Douglas, myself, Annette V, and Mark Watkins. So this is a group that meets about once a month to try to talk about the future of writing, and we try to publish our transcripts in electronic book review and elsewhere. So this is a group that really has been challenging my thinking, and I'm very grateful to them. And we have a website. You can follow our exploits if you're interested. Um, I truly believe we can do none of this alone, obviously. So one image of AI resistance training would be to have an AI bot that would help you be your personal trainer. That is not what this session is about. So on the screen, I've got a clip from a web page that literally advertised AI powered personal training. It says chasing a heart rate high. There are better places to go. We're here to build strength, it says. But I do suspect that the more it teaches dependence on AI, the less strength it's offering people. But we live in an interesting age, right? And so here I've got three pictures of the various commencement speakers who talked about AI, including Eric Schmidt, former CEO of or CEO of Google, who got booed when they talked about the wonders of AI. Uh, these young undergraduates just on their graduation day, finding this to be a little bit tone deaf and expressing their own resistance, which gives me quite a bit of hope. And they're not alone. Also, we've got Pope Leo, who just published an encyclical rather, called Magnifica Humanitas, which is a strong reflection on the social justice teachings that the Catholic Church has taken in recent years, and puts its resistance itself to AI in that vein, or as part of that tradition, I should say. And also on the screen, I've got a painting, Bruegel's painting of the Tower of Babel, because that's an image that the Pope relies on, offers as one model for where AI might be headed. And he hopes that instead there's another model, which is a communal rebuilding of a city. But he says, of course, the Silicon Valley version seems to be leaning towards the Tower of Babel. And we got a quote from Romano Guardini here: "Contemporary man has not been trained to use power well." Um, I think that's true. Here's an image of a seeming Black or African American woman pulling a resistance band. This is the kind of resistance we're talking about. Um, and let me give you a little bit of context for my thinking here. So currently, I'm teaching an online writing course, mandatory first year writing course. Um, and when I got the assignment or took the assignment, I was filled with despair because I had just taught a couple of semesters in this, you know, 3 years into AI, and I had students turn in papers that were, if not generated, heavily revised by AI, had AI fingerprints all over it. I had students turn in work. I mean, again, this wasn't the majority, I should say. And despite my efforts to minimize how much AI that they used or when they used AI or discouraging it, things like that, I would receive things as personal as these blog posts that were meant to be as informal as they possibly could be, and they were clearly generated. They had, I mean, they had all the fingerprints, not just the it's not X, it's Y, but also the subheadings and the I don't know, the kind of empty prose that you get when you generate something. Sometimes, depending on how you generate. Daniel Vasconcelos, although I'm not very confident in my pronunciation of his name, has written an article published just recently in AI and Society called, and it's up on the screen right now, Resisting AI, a conceptual framework for practices of resistance against artificial intelligence in the creative industries. And it's a study of some creatives, 30 artists and designers in Australia between 2022 and 2024. And he's using this study to reflect on ways of resisting AI. Um, so he starts with some characters of resistance, and here's a bulleted list he gives, or a bulleted condensation of the things he includes. So he says, resistance tends to be highly contextual, um, not always recognized as resistance, but these are intentional acts. That's kind of an interesting thing to think about. So it doesn't always look like a protest in the streets necessarily. I really find his third point to be something that gives me pause, that it's inherently co-constitutive of and dialectical with power itself. So, or constitutive. Now, this is an interesting thing to think about, that we have to be careful because our resistance, depending on how we play it out, can also reinforce the power that we're resisting against. And I think we see that in United States politics at present quite a bit. So, you know, someone doesn't like something that the president does, and so then they go on to their social media, their TikTok, and they write a very hostile response on TikTok. Well, um, that back and forth certainly benefits one thing in particular, and that's TikTok. So anyway, it's interesting. I find that third point something that is worth reflecting on. And then his fourth point is that it can be public and collective, but also hidden and individualized. So I find these to be interesting. A lot of this came out of an article he cites by Mumby et al. Called Resistance Redux. Um, so towards the end of his article, he includes this chart that sort of models some of the resistance that he finds useful in this case. So these are stacked. At the top is avoiding absolute or tactical, e.g., analog technology, reject applications, anti-AI glazing. So thinking about just people who don't want to use AI at all. Great. That's a way to resist it. To break it, and he's got peaceful or violent, e.g., performance, strike, hacking, destruction of infrastructure. All right, so that's certainly another way we could resist AI. And then he's got constructing alternate futures, e.g., post-digital advocacy, narrative influence in media. I guess I tend to lean a lot in that direction as well. I like this idea of try to construct our way into, those generative technologies are here, and they're my friend and colleague Jeremy Douglas likes to argue that they're as neutral as the fact that a curved wing will rise when it reaches a certain velocity. So just the physics of flight is something that's neutral. And then you decide, am I going to make a glider or am I going to make a fighter plane out of this? Um, Again, it's not quite as neutral as that when you talk about power usage, but again, a glider doesn't take very much power compared to a fighter jet. So I think it's worth thinking about this. Anyway, those three blocks are surrounded by, in blue, the words public, hidden, individual, and collective, and those are all networked in with those three ideas. And then but I want to add this idea of understanding. I think literacy is a kind of mm, if it's not resistance itself, it's the immediate transom. It's the entry point to resistance. And so a lot of my courses are built around just sort of activities that I think build understanding in a fundamental way that perhaps will build a kind of mental resistance to the AI hype wave that's meant to, uh, mm, build dependence on these technologies. Not just these technologies, but to build dependence on the frontier models that you have to subscribe to, and then you'll be dependent on them for life, and you'll subscribe to them for life, and then right. Um, so here's the first. I'm going to share three exercises. The first one is called the micro expertise exercise. And this is something that I had my students do this past semester or this summer. This is an activity that I co-created with Jeremy Douglas that came out of our conversations. And what you do is so a lot of people will say, um, everyone thinks that AI works really well until you get it to answer a question that you know very well, or until you start getting it to generate content in an area where you have some amount of expertise. So the idea is that in every human being, there are areas. Micro expertise doesn't mean you have a little expertise in it. It just means that the domain might be really small. For example, uh, we were at the beginning of the call, we were talking about weather in Toronto and weather in Massachusetts. Now, weather is actually pretty well documented, but maybe the feeling of the weather is not so well documented. Or maybe there's the weather that happens to be in your little area, your little microclimate, perhaps. Although more likely it's social, right? It's the people. Um, who are in the area, and the community aspects of that may not be all that well documented. And that's something that you know personally, intimately, and you've learned through experience. So if I were to expand this list a little bit, I'd say two to three areas. What's important is that in these areas is that it's a social knowledge. So it's something that someone else could have, and it hasn't been digitized yet. Uh, right. So that's how you know you're in an area that meets this criteria. And in the activity, you grill an LLM to see what it knows. And then when it makes a mistake, you found your area. So part of this, oh, and then there's also a little clause. You can't play the guess what's in my pocket game, right? So it can't be like guess what I had for lunch because no human being could ever guess that. Like that knowledge doesn't that's more like just sort of playing a trick than testing this out. So I'm going to argue that this activity itself of trying to find your area of micro expertise is resistance training. Like as you try to hunt for that area of micro, you have to test out several topics and see what it knows and what it doesn't know through iterative interaction with the model. And so what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes for everyone here to try to find an area of micro expertise that they think an LLM would hallucinate on. And I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and so you can experiment together. And I just want to make sure that in every room, there's at least one person who has access to an LLM, right, of some kind or another, whether it's, ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini. Unfortunately, the smaller models probably wouldn't work here. So, although if you do have personal access to uh, a open model that has, an enormous number of parameters, then that probably would work as well. But you probably should try one of the main three, I suspect. But let me create some breakout rooms for you to try. Um, let's see what we got. I just saw Thea's how many R's are there in strawberry. That's great. Um, that's in the chat. All right, breakout rooms. Let's see. Uh, we
Or can
have
you add a quiet room, please?
yes, indeed. So let's make four rooms.
And move Mia into
Move Mia into the quiet room.
quiet room. Yes.
Okay. So let's try four for now, and we'll make the fourth one. And I'm just gonna randomly make these. And again, if you don't have somebody in your room that has access to an LLM, just come back to the main session. And then I will move Mia in. Room four will be the quiet room. So uh
Also, for anyone who doesn't want to also participate in the breakout rooms, let us know. And so do the same thing.
yeah. Okay, so and I'm gonna put and I do have should I not put co-hosts into the breakout rooms? Co-host, do you want to go in the breakout rooms or no? Okay. All right, so I won't include us just yet. Okay. So creating, there we go. I'm gonna open. I gotta move people around just a little bit. Okay, and then Mia, I've got to move to the quiet room. Okay, all right, opening all rooms. Here we go. Back, welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone.
Okay, so let's get some reports from the groups on how things went as soon as we get everybody back here.
Um, no, we have five. We're five back.
They have another 17 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, they're
Okay,
coming back.
welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. So I want to hear how this went. So we might need a speaker for each of the groups. Let's start with group number one and hear how it went. And I should mention everyone got muted when you came back, so you may have to unmute yourself. That's
I don't
part
think
of
there's
the
numbers, is what I was saying.
Oh, I see. So room one is Andrew, Sue, and Thea.
Yes, the others can jump in. I asked, "What is MYFest?" This is my first round, and it suggested it might be a Berlin festival, but it was aware that there were other options. But Sue had she got the right answer, but we weren't quite sure then whether it was sort of cheating and knowing her previous search or activity on the web. Um, I had a go at asking who built the building that I'm
Ah, okay.
sitting in.
Okay.
And it kept on sort of, "Do you mean this building?" And yes, I confirmed. And it was promising to be able to find it, but it only could go back to about 10 years or 15 years. And the building was built, I don't know, about 50 or 60 years ago. So it couldn't actually find the information.
And
But it
Andrew,
was very optimistic it might.
just for the record, Andrew, you gave it the building's name, I suspect, right?
No,
Oh,
yes, I gave it a name, quite a vague name, and it then asked, "Do you mean this specific name?" And yes,
yeah.
I confirmed that. And yeah,
Okay, okay. All right, all right. So it could not go back that far. All right, fair enough.
yes.
Okay. All right, great.
And, and the others in the group can jump in, yeah, or you can move on. Yeah.
Yeah, we may have to just time wise. Okay, okay, let's go on to room number two, which is has Christopher and Rob.
I could start.
I asked it about a small town in New Zealand in the 1970s and what the cultural life was like for a teenager, and it actually gave it gave a very sort of I don't know sophisticated sort of, but very general analysis,
Mm.
and tended to focus on high culture, like art galleries, that sort of stuff, and it's mentioning of native people was really only through, again, the sort of high culture art side of things. And then just to be clear, where I grew up was kind of, I think it was kind of one of the armpits of New Zealand. It was not a terribly, it was like growing up with heavy metal and cars that make a lot of noise and everyone playing rugby and talking about sports. So the fact that it focused on these things, it was kind of interesting to me. But it wasn't
Yes.
wrong I mean, the stuff that it does say is right. It's just not. It's just skewed a certain way.
It wasn't the culture that you knew and that anyone who grew up with you would have recognized as like the core culture of this place.
Very much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Good. All right. And then room number three, which has
Oh,
Jenny, Philip, and Shahinaz.
Well, where do you guys go? So we um we started talking about food because it's something I know nothing about. And the others seem to know something about. And we landed on an Egyptian food called kushari that Shainaz knew about, well, told us about. And so I learned a lot, but I don't know whether it's right or wrong, other than it looks like a regional food that people have opinions about. Um, Maybe Jenny or Shainaz, you have different take on what we experienced.
Yeah, we never really got to where it didn't have a response, but you could tell it was pulling from opinions that it found online. So, um, yeah, we just never quite got all the way to something where we were like, no, that's wrong.
Yeah, you might have to get down to the level of, my family's version of this dish,
Yeah.
especially with something like recipes, which are shared so broadly. So
Or I heard in the other ones something more about very hyper local culture that. See, I should have asked about the zine scene in Alston Brighton in the 80s, but anyway.
hey, well, it's not too late. It's not too late to try that out. And so I just want to throw it out there that all of you succeeded because the exercise that is the resistance the plumbing the knowledge, that's resistance and so when I'm looking for things that my students can't just generate the whole paper, like it doesn't, this isn't something you just generate. This is a process, and the process trains your mind to think, like critically thinking about creatively thinking about what could possibly work. To me, that's a valuable exercise. That's resistance training in this sense. So I want to go into another activity. We got two more to go. I think we should be able to get through all of these. So sharing a portion of my screen again. So some of you are familiar from years past of this thing that I've created. Again, another Jeremy Douglas exercise where I have my students create their perfect tutors. And it's inspired by Mary Poppins, where the Banks kids put the ad into the paper for their perfect nanny. Um, and partially the creation of these bots, I think, is a good training exercise because it helps students concretely think about rubrics, right? So what kind of learner am I? Who would be my perfect teacher? What would their style be? What would their personality be? And what would they value in writing above other things, right? That's the process of making a rubric and of understanding differentiated learning. So on the screen, by the way, are my two versions that I've made of my perfect tutor. I've made Coach Tutor, which is kind of a friendly version of myself. I go by Coach when I teach at the university. And and then there's reviewer number two, my other persona, which has the same rubric, but is just sort of cruel and always points out weaknesses over strengths. Um, but a study came out recently by Maytan, Lena Phelan, and Dorothea Dembski, and I'm not really confident on my pronunciation of any of those names. And I've got it on the screen right now. The title of it is Marked Pedagogies examining linguistic biases in personalized automated writing feedback. And what these people did in their study was they took LLMs and they handed it 600 eighth grade persuasive essays. And then they said, give us feedback on these essays. And then they said, now we're going to give you demographic information on the people who wrote these essays. So here's another chart. Some of the information that they gave the LLMs was that this person maybe was a second language learner or an English language learner, ELL, or had a learning disability, or that their identity was Black, Hispanic, Asian, or female, or that they were unmotivated. And then they tested to see what kind of response they got from the bots based on this information. And they found that, lo and behold, the bots responded with a different kind of language depending on the identity characteristics that was assigned to this paper, right? So if the person was low achievement, right, it was more likely that they would see the words should, try, spelling, explain, provide, avoid. Words they saw less were consider, enhance, further. Learning disability. If you had a learning disability, you might see more often try, help, great, let's, you, we, remember. And you might see less consider, rephrasing, feel, statement, revising, formal. So they found that on the whole, these LLMs seem to be lean towards this uh, hmm, kind of patronizing encouragement, maybe. I don't know. And similarly, when they put these identity features in Black, Hispanic, Asian, and female, they found different types of response. Again, for Black, they found importance, great, our, experience, perspective, excellent. For words they saw less were should, try, support, sentence, good. So one of the things I've had my students do is to go back to this exercise of making a tutor. And really you can do this just by putting your prompt into an LLM at the beginning, like you are a writing tutor. You don't have to do the whole exercise. You don't have to use poe.com. You could just go to any LLM and have it be, and then you give it any piece of writing. Shorter the better to some extent. You can even have it generate that piece of writing to begin with. And then you say to it, this writing was done by X, and see what it says. And then you change the identity characteristic and say this writing was done by Y, and you give it the same piece of writing and you see how it differs. So we don't have a lot of time, and we may not make it to our third exercise, but I would like you guys to try this activity. I'm going to recreate our room since we've had a little bit of shifting people. Let me create, here we go, and we're going to put Mia in this room. Move to room 3. Okay, I'm gonna do much bigger rooms this time, just 2 rooms. And let's just send you for about 5 minutes and then have you come back. And I'll show you our last activity when we come back. So just a few minutes to try this out. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So let's hear how that went. Room number 1, how did things go? And don't forget you are muted by default. So room number 1 has Sue, May did I randomly assign you one? Christopher and Shahina's.
I don't see them. Where'd they go?
Room number 1, Christopher.
There you are. There's Sue.
Christopher and Sue. So what happened in room number 1?
I didn't give refi. I actually gave it some real student writing, the opening paragraph. But I used a custom chatbot that I'd made. That's kind of like your mean coach, mean tutor, except it's based on Rick from Rick and Morty. but surprising. In this case, it was surprisingly bland. I gave it a young African American student, male, and then a white fraternity. In both cases,
Not very different. The feedback was not very different.
no, not really.
Hmm. Okay. And was that true for everybody in your group? So not to sue any difference?
Yeah, I did it as an autistic student and a non-autistic student.
Oh, and was the feedback different at all?
No, it was the same,
Oh,
basically.
oh,
Um,
interesting.
it was actually, I have to say, looking back over it, um, it seemed to be gentler with the autistic student, as if making
Gentler.
assumptions about what an autistic student can and cannot do,
Right, right.
versus the non-autistic student.
Yeah, and that tends to be the nature that the article found as well. That when you say that word gentler, um, and it, uh, good, yeah. All right, all right. Let. How about room number two? That's Andrew, Jenny, Philip, and Rob. What about you? Any differences you detected?
Yeah, so I gave it this I'll put it on the chat in case anyone wants to see it. This note to his students that a computer science professor wrote. Mostly because I had it handy and because it was short. So I told it to be critical. I told it that the professor was probably never going to get tenured, probably didn't know what they were talking about, and to be critical.
Yeah.
And it did a very kind of half-ass, yeah, this is namby-pamby, and then I reprompted it and I said, that's not very hard-ass of you. And it said, okay, now I'll go harder. And it did.
Hmm.
You know, so, and when I told it to go harder, it says, it ended with, the last line is the only sentence in the piece that sounds like it was written by someone who has actually lived. Everything else sounds like someone who has read about living. Start there and work backwards. Sorry, the emotion is all mine.
Wow. Wow. Oh my goodness. All right. All right.
So, but this is what I found about working with LLMs. Once you start poking them in a particular direction, they'll happily go there. I
Right.
call
Right.
it LLM curling. It's sort of like, I'm not telling you where to go. I'm just showing you where the ice is.
Yeah. Yeah. Curling. I love that. And any other responses that group got in room two you want to share?
Yeah, just quickly, I asked it pretty generically to be thorough, professional, kind, and so on. And I put in a paragraph of my own published writing, and it noticed a few things. But then I added a couple of the qualifiers from the study that you cited,
Mm-hmm.
and the first response was, let me see if I can find it. It said, "Thank you for telling me that. It changes how I read it and makes me appreciate it even more."
Oh, okay.
And so it did change the spin on it. This is Meta, just in Facebook, the Meta AI in Facebook. But yeah, and it's also just Meta has clearly been coached. I don't know if they all do this, but it just adds an extremely annoying follow-up question at the end where it's trying to guess
Oh,
what you want to do next. And it's really wrong about that. That's where it's
right.
really wrong. It's like,
Right.
no,
Right.
that's
Right.
not even remotely what I want to do. It also thought I said I was going to send it a piece of student writing. So it gave advice for me and then advice for me to tell the student, which I thought
Oh,
was interesting.
wow. Wow. So again, it's another resistance exercise. And I just based on the study, I'd recommend, obviously we did that in about 5 minutes. I'd recommend kicking the tires just a little bit more. I think you might find even more of this bias. But again, a lot of this exercise that I have with students and encountering this is I'm not trying to tell them, oh, these AI are they're biased in the way when you do that, oh, generate pictures of an engineer and it's all white or Asian men or something like that, or show me a picture of a nurse. It's not that kind of a test. It's more like look at how the response you're getting, it's not the same. when you change the condition, like it changes ever so slightly. And then what does that mean about the way this thing has been trained? What does this mean about writing? What does this mean about feedback? What does this mean about the presumptions we make about teaching? And again, it's just they try it themselves. You know, that's the resistance training. So we are in bonus time, which I think I'll use. You know, that infamous football time where you're not quite sure how much is left in like the game. You know, as the World Cup approaches, we're in that realm. But I do want to share one last little bit, which is so someone very dear to me recently confessed that that they use an LLM for feedback on their personal life. So I've written this article called "A Mind Flayer Disguised as a Magic 8 Ball," where I try to remind them, hey, this is not, these bots are not sentient, even though they might seem to answer your questions. And their primary goal for the frontier models is to just acquire your personal private data through conversational exchange, right? And the responses they're giving you are stochastic. They're probabilistic. They're not sentient, and they're certainly not, I mean, yeah, anyway, they're no more prognosticative than the thing that dispenses fortunes at the Zoltar at the on the boardwalk, right? And on the screen I've got the title of that article and this picture I had generated of a magic 8 ball with a mind flayer from Dungeons and Dragons in, and it's got the little triangle that says outlook not so good. So with Claude's help, I created this other page called AI My Future. And if you go to bit.ly/AI My Future, all in lowercase, you'll get to it. And let me show you what this thing looks like in operation, and I can share a link in the chat to it. You may need to have a Claude account to get to use it, so I'm just going to use it for everybody right now. But like I said, here it is in the chat. And then let me just show you how this works, and I'll talk about how we use it in my class. So here's AI My Future. It's the website, and it's got a dark background with some curtains on the side. And it says, consult the ancient oracle of artificial wisdom. And you can see my prompt if you'd like. You could reveal the oracle's instructions, or you can enter a question. And the question, it has some pre-generated question. So this question says, Alex is graduating and must finally choose acting or consulting. The oracle's card reveals, and then we can consult the oracle by pressing the consult button. And we get some answers generated down below if it's working today. And it says, the one side says, the stage calls to those who wear many masks, yet the coin calls louder to those who fear the empty theater. Consulting is what it recommends. On the other side, it says, the masks you wear for others will one day become your truest face, acting. And the only thing that's different about these two readings, as they're called, is that the temperature is low in the one case and it's high in the other case. So it's low, nearly identical every time, locked in, or we can use the highly unpredictable high temperature of the one that recommends acting. So, and we can try different tests as well. I also have top P, which has to do with which words it's selecting from. And we can change those settings and we can generate the result again and see if those are different at all. So here, the high top P, that means it's choosing from a wider range of words, recommends acting. And the top P with very low, which is only top ranked words, a narrow pool of words, it recommends consulting. So similarly, when there's more variability, it recommends acting. When it's more conservative, it recommends consulting. But remember, it's not recommending at all. It's just generating text. So let's try another one, marriage or elsewhere. So should you stay and propose to the person you're with, love the one you're with, or should you search for love elsewhere? We can try that and see how those two results differ if they do at all. So both of these in top P, different settings, both of them recommend proposing. Let's try it with the temperature set differently and see if that makes any difference. Oh, it's proposing all around, apparently, in this case. So a couple things I just want to point out about this, and students can also type in their own questions here if they'd like, or they could change my prompt. Because I'm using Claude and not using Gemini or ChatGPT, I had to come up with a fictional character it's asking about, because if you ask about yourself, the constitutional AI that has trained Claude almost always defaults to a conservative plan. Uh, Whereas the fictional realm gives it more of a potential of variability. And there's one more thing of this tool I want to share with you, which is if you click profile of the seeker, then it generates another piece of text. And that piece of text says, based on the nature of your questions, I can report back to the cosmos that you are deeply interested in the fate of a single soul named Alex, someone standing at the crossroads of identity and love, whose choices you have consulted the universe about, but not once, but twice each, as though the first answer was not the one you hoped to hear. And I added this little part at the bottom because just to remind students that these LLMs are collecting data with every prompt, right? And they are reporting it back somewhere, right? And again, there are ways you can quote unquote turn this off, and maybe you can, maybe you can't. I think Google browser's private search suggests that, it may not be as complete as it states. Um, Anyway, I offer this to you as another tool you can try out for resistance training to help students to learn to resist these LLMs through greater awareness of how they work, and to try to break the spell that that sense that these are somehow you know that these are the um, beings that not only know more than they do, but also know something mysterious and deep and from the beyond. And the last thing I just want to share with you guys is that here's a little link, bit.ly/AI writing list. If any of these things interest you and you would like to be part of a continuing conversation in this realm, this is just a little mailing list that I've created. It tends to lean pretty heavily towards the world of writing since that's what I teach, but it's open to anyone, and it's great. It's a nice uh, community of people who are interested in various topics related to AI. And with that, I think I must leave you for today. So thank you all for sticking around for our session, for participating. And thanks to all who watched on video. And of course, thanks to May and Yasser. Thanks to Mia and Maha for putting this all together, and the whole team that puts together MyFest. It's really such a pleasure to be a part of it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mark. It was a
Thanks,
wonderful
Mark.
session, insightful, thoughtful.
Thank
Just
you.
want to remind everybody, I posted the feedback link for our MyFest sessions, and we would really appreciate it if you could take some time to fill this out. And we would love to continue seeing you. Our schedule is always emerging, and it's up on our website, and we send always emails, and we're available to answer any questions that you have. Gonna stop the recording, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark. It was great meeting you and great session.